Another headline, another mystery, another signal on the airwaves. This is the end.
Oh yeah. Welcome everyone to welcome everyone to ENDtv. This is the ENDstream, where we're simultaneously streaming on YouTube, Rumble, and on Kick. Our social medias are on X, on Instagram, and Discord. ENDtv is a channel about geopolitics, it's about culture, it's the humanistic aspect of everything. And it's all about like the social forces shaping human experience. We describe it as raw, real, rational. It's the signal that cuts through the noise. So we have a lot of things to cover today. So before we start, I just want to show you all the channels that I just told you. So over here we have our YouTube channel. This is our current stream at the moment. This is me. I'm your host, Edge. And so we have a lot of videos on our YouTube channel. We have a lot coming up. We have a video coming out with my co-host Bird about Ceuta, the border, and like between Spain and Morocco, like what happened. We have like new videos about all sorts of things. We have stuff about Epstein. We have like, what is ENDtv? Like, what is our channel about? Like, what's going on? We have things like interviews. And yeah, generally we talk a lot about geopolitics, what's going on in the world. We also cover different things like heroes who are underreported around the world. So yeah, so we have like different sections. We have the live streams over here. Sometimes we have a chill stream where me and Bird, like we talk together about like chill stuff. Like we don't want just to report, let's say, on everyday like political stories. We talk about all sorts of things. Like we include like the main headlines, but we also talk about real stories, more down to earth things. So it's pretty chill. Over here we have our Rumble channel, and over here we're on Kick as well. We also have like an Instagram channel with all our shorts. Here's Bird again, and we have an X channel where we talk a lot about like new things, and we have a Discord community. So feel free to join, share, subscribe, like, follow. Hit that notification bell on YouTube so you can be updated whenever we have a video. It really goes a long way if you subscribe as well. We just want to engage like with the community and the community to engage with us. So what are we going to talk about today? All right, so this is the ENDstream, where we go beyond the headlines, connect the dots, and ask the questions that don't always get asked. I'm your host, Edge, like I mentioned before, and we've got a seriously packed show for you today. Like, I can't wait to get into all these news stories. And the stuff we're going to be talking about is Europe is changing. Italy has a new force emerging on the nationalist right, with General Roberto Vannacci increasingly challenging Giorgia Meloni and the established political order. Germany is facing its own political battle as the AfD continues to rise, and the country's famous political firewall comes under growing pressure. And across Europe, another battle is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore: free speech. How far should governments go to combat misinformation, extremism, and harmful content? When does regulation become censorship? And who gets to decide where that line actually is? We're also going to Ukraine, where Zelenskyy is facing growing pressure over elections. His argument is that holding a wartime election could tear Ukraine apart. But Ukraine has now been fighting for how long? For how many years? So how long can extraordinary wartime political arrangements continue? And when does protecting a democracy start requiring the restoration of normal democratic accountability? Then we get into one of the biggest geopolitical mysteries of the war, the Nord Stream. Another Ukrainian suspect has reportedly been arrested in connection with the pipeline explosions. And if Ukrainian-linked individuals are eventually proven responsible, how far up the chain of command did that responsibility actually go? Because there's a huge difference between Ukrainian nationals acting independently, people operating within Ukrainian military or intelligence circles, an operation authorized somewhere within the state apparatus, and an operation personally authorized by the highest political leadership. Those are not the same allegations, and they require very different levels of evidence. Now, let's be clear, an arrest is not a proof of guilt, and evidence of involvement by individuals does not automatically establish that the Ukrainian government ordered that attack. But the investigation is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore, and the consequences could extend far beyond the pipelines themselves. Like over here, we say we go beyond the headlines at ENDtv, but let's also go beyond the pipelines into European energy security, Ukraine's relationship with its European allies, and the political future of the war. Then we're going even bigger. China's rare earth dominance. And what does this mean? China has spent decades building control over one of the world's most strategically important supply chains. Rare earths are essential to modern technology, electric vehicles, electronics, and advanced military systems. So did Beijing deliberately create a geopolitical weapon? Shall we call it that? Or did China simply build an industrial advantage while the West became increasingly dependent on it? And finally, we're leaving geopolitics and going straight into Vice City, because GTA 6 has been hit by another major leak. GTA 6 has been hit by another major leak, like I said, with alleged leaked gameplay circulating online, while Rockstar prepares another major official presentation and Take-Two pursues information from platforms including Microsoft and Discord. So what actually happened? How much of GTA 6 has been compromised? And why has the leak become part of a much bigger argument about digital ownership and the future of physical media? We've got all of that plus plenty more. So whether you're watching us live, catching the replay, or listening from somewhere around the world, welcome to ENDtv. No political teams, no blind narratives, no telling you what you're supposed to think, just stories, context, arguments, and questions. This is the ENDstream, episode 27. Let's get right into it. All right. So as you can tell, I was going full GTA mode with this shirt. I don't have to explain to anyone. Like if you've played Vice City, you know, I think the guy's called Tony. All right, let's get straight into the stories. Over here, I found this interesting article. Let's have a look, and I'll tell you what it's about. So across Europe, a growing battle is taking place over one of the most fundamental principles of democracy, the right to speak freely. Governments and regulators increasingly argue that misinformation, hate speech, extremism, and online manipulation must be controlled. But critics warn that the powers being created to fight harmful speech could also be used to silence political opinions that challenge those in power. The real danger, according to the argument, is not simply censorship as we traditionally imagine it. It is the gradual expansion of institutions deciding which ideas are responsible, acceptable, or safe enough for public debate. Once governments, regulators, and technology platforms become arbiters of truth, the definition of harmful speech can become increasingly political. And that creates a fundamental question for Europe. Is free speech only being protected when everyone agrees with what is being said? Or is it being protected when the speech is controversial, offensive, and deeply unpopular. Oops. All right, let's move on. Over here, let's talk a bit about Italy, like what's going on over there. So Italy's political landscape may be about to get even more turbulent. A new figure is rapidly emerging on the nationalist right, Roberto Vannacci, the army general who became famous and infamous. You've probably seen, what is it called? The Three Amigos with the infamous El Guapo. Anyway, and infamous for we're talking about Roberto Vannacci, openly challenging modern political orthodoxy or immigration, multiculturalism, homosexuality, and national identity. And while his comments have generated outrage among the critics, they have also made him a powerful political attraction for voters who feel that mainstream politicians have become too cautious, too controlled, and too afraid to speak openly. What makes Vannacci particularly important is that he could now disrupt the balance of power on the Italian right itself. His rise puts pressure not just on the left, but on Giorgia Meloni and Matteo Salvini. Meloni has transformed herself into a prime minister who can operate within the European political establishment. But Vannacci, I think his name is Vannacci because it has two C's, appeals to voters looking for something more controversial, more confrontational, and uncompromising. Italy could therefore be heading towards a battle for the nationalist vote, not between left and right, but between the established right and a new, more rebellious force. So over here, there's also another article from Politico. And so could Vannacci become Meloni's biggest rival? Roberto Vannacci is no longer just a controversial general with a political following. He is increasingly being viewed as a potential threat to the dominance of Giorgia Meloni herself. The question now is whether his growing popularity could eventually turn him into an independent political force capable of challenging Italy's most powerful woman. And this is where the situation becomes particularly interesting. Meloni has succeeded by taking nationalist politics into government and proving that she can work with European institutions and international allies. Vannacci, however, represents a different type of politics, more provocative, more anti-establishment. I don't blame him, to be honest, and potentially more willing to challenge the boundaries Meloni has had to respect as prime minister. If his popularity continues to grow, Italy's right could eventually face a major split between those who want nationalism inside the system and those who want something willing to fight the system itself. Now, there's also the topic about immigration over here. Third article by Politico. So, in another major sign of how European politics is changing, Italy's Giorgia Meloni and Denmark's Mette Frederiksen are finding common ground on one of the continent's most explosive issues, mass and uncontrolled migration. They come from very different political traditions, but events such as the migrant crisis at Ceuta or Ceuta, depending on where you come from, are pushing European leaders towards increasingly similar conclusions about borders. The significance of this should not be underestimated. Tougher immigration policies are no longer simply the territory of the political right. Even leaders from the center-left are increasingly arguing that uncontrolled migration is politically unsustainable and that Europe's borders must actually be enforced. The old political divide is beginning to break down, replaced by a more fundamental question. Can Europe maintain open societies and functioning welfare states without regaining control over who enters its territory? Now let's move to France. Here's your boy, Macron. All right, so in this article, right? So France has spent decades presenting itself as one of Europe's strongest defenders of sovereignty and independence. But when it comes to technology that increasingly controls modern life, The reality may be very different. A new argument being made is that France, and by extension much of Europe, has become heavily dependent on foreign technology giants, particularly from the United States. From cloud computing and artificial intelligence to data infrastructure and online platforms, European governments and businesses increasingly operate on technologies they do not own or control. And that raises a much bigger geopolitical question. Can a country really claim to sovereignty, or can a country claim to be sovereign if its digital infrastructure depends on foreign corporations? France may talk about strategic independence, but the deeper Europe goes into the digital age, the more difficult it becomes to escape the gravitational pull of the American big tech. So what else is France doing over here? I mean, look at this title. So France and Saudi Arabia have agreed on a massive 6 billion euro or around $7 billion US dollar entertainment project near Paris. I was going to say Paris, including a new theme park inspired by the Japanese manga and anime franchise DragonballZ. I like DragonballZ. I don't mind this, but it's a bit weird, you know. Like, is anyone like pocketing some change over here? I don't know. The development will be built near Cergy Pontoise, northwest of Paris, and is expected to create around 22,000 jobs. I mean, I'm sure it's kind of temporary for a few years, unless they're there permanently, which I doubt. But this is like more for construction. So the project will be financed by Saudi entertainment and investment group Qiddiya, and will actually comprise 3 separate theme parks. Although many of the details are still being finalized and there's no confirmed opening date. The idea reportedly came about after Emmanuel Macron and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman discovered their shared enthusiasm for DragonballZ during Macron's visit to Saudi Arabia in 2025. For Saudi Arabia, the investment is part of its broader strategy to diversify its economy beyond oil and expand its global entertainment industry, while French officials are presenting the project as another major vote of confidence in France as a destination for foreign investment. I mean, France recently had the Olympic Games, right? All right, let's move on. What else is going on in France? I mean, this title is weird, so I had a look about this. So one of the most disturbing stories emerging from France involves Christian Neg, a former senior civil servant at the Ministry of Culture, who is accused by nearly 250 women of drugging them during job interviews. According to the accusers, Neg allegedly put diuretics into drinks, causing women to experience an overwhelming and uncontrollable need to urinate. Some say they became desperate, that they wet themselves or were forced into humiliating situations in public. Investigators reportedly found records allegedly documenting what were described as experiments, including details about the women and their reactions. Neg is under formal investigation and awaiting trial, while he declined to comment on the BBC's allegations through his lawyer. I mean, what can I say? This is kind of weird if it was some sort of experiment. But the story goes beyond the accusations themselves. Many of the women say they had no idea they may have been drugged until police contacted them years later, leaving them to question traumatic experiences they could not explain at the time. The case has become part of a wider debate in France about chemical submission, the use of drugs to control, humiliate, or exploit victims, and whether institutions and the justice system have responded quickly enough. For some of the alleged victims, the years of delays have become a second form of suffering as they continue waiting for the case to finally reach trial. Now, I just thought of something which I didn't prepare for this stream. And that was like, I think a couple of years ago, like people were stabbed with syringes at concerts and stuff like that. And people didn't know what they were pricked with. Look it up for yourselves. I'm not here to tell you the stories. Look it up for yourselves. It's just increasingly worried, and maybe something needs to be done psychologically about the mind frame of these psychos or people. People need help. Like, what is this stuff? This is completely unacceptable. Like, what is going to happen to this guy? Like, I think they really need to punish this guy. They need to set an example. Something is completely wrong with the justice system in Europe. Like, they are accusing like victims, and perps are free and stuff. Something needs to be done. All right, let's move on. Let's move to Germany, right? Deutschland. So over here, an article by Brussels Signal. Germany's political establishment is increasingly focused on containing the rise of the Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, particularly in Eastern Germany, where the party has built significant electoral support. Across the political spectrum, campaigns and political efforts aimed at limiting the AfD's influence have become a major part of the broader political battle. The growing focus on the AfD highlights just how significant the party has become within German politics. Rather than being treated simply as another opposition force, it is increasingly at the center of the country's political debate. Critics argue that efforts to isolate or challenge the party could ultimately reinforce the AfD's message that Germany's political establishment is determined to keep it from gaining power. In Eastern Germany especially, the confrontation between AfD and its political opponents is becoming one of the defining struggles in the country's political landscape. Oh, hang on a sec. Let me just see something. So yeah, I mean, this article over here says that for years, Germany's mainstream political parties have maintained what is known as the Brandmauer, or a firewall, if you wish, a political barrier designed to prevent cooperation with the AfD. But that consensus may now be weakening. More Germans are beginning to question whether permanently excluding a party with millions of voters is sustainable in a democratic system. Like, what are they thinking over here? And that puts Germany's political establishment in a difficult position. Supporters of the firewall argue that cooperation would legitimize a party they consider unacceptable. Critics respond that if the AfD continues gaining support, refusing to engage with it would leave a growing section of the population effectively without political representation. The longer the firewall remains in place while the AfD continues to rise, the more pressure Germany's traditional parties may face from voters asking a simple question: how long can you keep excluding one of the country's largest political movements? And this applies to many countries, to be honest. All right, so off article just for a second. Let's mix this up a little bit. Let's have a look at what's going on in London, right? So footage circulating online appears to show the aftermath of London Pride Parade in Soho, with rubbish and debris left across parts of the area. The scenes have reignited criticism over the impact that huge public events can have on local communities, particularly with thousands of people descend on central London. Pride in London does not have rules requiring organizers and exhibitors to deal with their waste, but the footage raises questions about how effectively those rules are enforced and who ultimately gets left to clean it afterwards. I mean, I understand some people get paid to clean the waste, but I thought like the Japanese fans in the World Cup, like cleaning after themselves, in rubbish bags, or even in Japan and Tokyo, like taking it with them in plastic bags, sets a very nice example. I do love clean countries. I think I've seen some footage of places like Switzerland or something like that, and or Vienna, where there isn't any trash anywhere. I mean, it's such a shame. It's such a shame. It would be nice going to a city, not seeing any trash, not seeing people just throw and litter and gum and cigarettes and whatever, and even like furniture in some countries. Like, something needs to be done about cleanliness. And I'm not a clean freak by any means, but like, check out this next footage of London Pride. And this is the same in other places like Brighton. And I mentioned Brighton because I read some articles like a few years ago about people going to this Pride parade. And let me just make it clear that it's not just LGBT people who go to these parades. It's also straight people just wanting to party and to like have a nice time. But the thing is that there are so many people who are completely disrespectful. You get these drunk people. Like, I read articles ages ago about people climbing over fences, going into people's gardens, like from the back fence, and defecating in strangers, like in people's gardens, basically, just using other people's gardens as toilets. First of all, you don't go to the toilet in a garden, but it's like completely disrespectful. And let's move on to another place, a different kind of waste over here. And but let me talk about it first before I show you. So New York appears to have developed an underground population. What are we talking about? Are we talking about like the Rat King from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? I don't know. The viral footage shows groups of people climbing out of manholes in the middle of the night, wearing headlamps and protective gear, with similar sightings across Brooklyn and Queens. Nobody seems to know exactly what they're doing down there, with theories ranging from urban exploration to scavenging for valuables, or even using the city's enormous sewer network to move around unnoticed. But honestly, at this point, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles living down there and surviving on stolen New York pizza doesn't sound completely impossible. So if 4 turtles suddenly emerge from a manhole with a giant pizza in hand, just remember the golden rule. Cowabunga, dude. So here we have the footage. Let's have a look.
To a deepening mystery here in New York City, police are investigating a new video of 3 people emerging from a sewer in New York City. It's just the latest in a series of similar and disturbing incidents in recent weeks. Here's ABC's Morgan Norwood.
Tonight, the NYPD investigating this new video showing 3 people climbing out of a Manhattan manhole in the middle of the night. Wow. One by one, some in all black, wearing waders and headlamps, emerging to the street just feet from Penn Station in Madison Square Garden. It's the latest in a string of bizarre incidents in the belly of New York. This group, oddly similar to the ones police were trying to identify weeks ago. Seen here, also wearing waders, carrying flashlights, and prying open a manhole, then slipping into the sewer. In another incident, authorities investigating 7 men, also with headlamps and shovels, spawning from the sewer system in Brooklyn. One guy almost gets hit by a car. Police think these groups are hunting for valuables. The city's Department of Environmental Protection says it inspected the sewers around this latest incident and found no damage to the infrastructure.
That's so weird. That's like weird stories. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to Canada and the US. There's been a lot of beef lately. So the trade war between the US and Canada, let me just load this up, is escalating after President Donald Trump announced plans to double tariffs on Canadian cars and auto parts from 25% to 50% starting January 1st, 2027, with a higher rate also applying to steel and trucks. The move follows the collapse of trade negotiations, with Trump accusing Canada of being difficult to deal with, while Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says Washington asked too much and offered too little. Canada has now retaliated with tariffs of up to 50% on $27.6 billion worth of U.S. goods, including steel, aluminum, furniture, clothing, paper, and dairy products, beginning September 8th, with Canada representing the destination for $175.8 billion of U.S. exports in just the first half of 2026. The escalating tariffs threaten to push up costs in both sides of the border and deepen a trade confrontation between two highly integrated economies. And to top it off, like I also remember, over here we have some more news. Trump floats renaming Lake Ontario to Lake America. Denies claim he'd interfere.
Preparing to roll out.
Denies claim he'd interfere with Canadians speaking French. Like, what does he care? To be honest, Canada also said that they would keep calling it Lake Ontario no matter what. Kind of weird, right? All right, let's move on. Let's move on. So we're going into our first deep dive over here. And what are we going to be talking about? Let's have a look. Let me show you an article over here. Over here, this is Queen Ursula von der Leyen. Okay, she's not a queen, but call her that sometimes. And so this is an article from American Greatness. So the article by Kenneth R. Timmerman argues that Europe is approaching a broad political, demographic, and institutional crisis, with uncontrolled migration presented as one of the central drivers. The immediate example is the reported influx of tens of thousands of North African migrants into Ceuta, with which the author says expose weaknesses in Europe's border system. The episode allegedly contributed to renewed tensions between EU countries over migration and prompted Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, like I said before, to jointly demand stronger controls and greater respect for European cultural values. The author then moves beyond migration to criticize EU governance. He argues that European voters increasingly feel disconnected from decisions made by unelected EU institutions, particularly the European Commission. He focuses on Ursula von der Leyen's push to reduce the requirement for unanimity in EU foreign policy decisions, arguing that this could further centralize power in Brussels and weaken individual member states. The article also criticizes EU policies on energy, I don't blame them, agriculture, and environmental regulation, using issues such as renewable energy policy and wolf protection as examples of what the author considers bureaucratic overreach. And that, in my opinion, is the truth. Finally, Timmerman presents Europe as facing a choice: continuing towards greater centralization, multiculturalism, and mass immigration, or return towards stronger national sovereignty and an emphasis on Europe's traditional cultural heritage. And at ENDtv, we're all about culture, we're all about people. And the main takeaway is that the article sees Europe's problems as interconnected. Mass migration, weakening national sovereignty, EU centralization, unpopular regulations, all these things, they make an existential political crisis for Europe. Let's move on. So over here, we have an article from the Daily Signal. And over here, this article by Jarrett Stepman focuses specifically on free speech, academia, and the R-Day controversy, rather than Europe's economy or migration. The article centers on Jason Arday, a Cambridge professor whose academic work and personal biography came under serious scrutiny. According to the article, allegations of plagiarism and fabrication emerged, and Nathan Kofnes was one of the academics who publicly investigated and exposed the allegations. Arday subsequently died by suicide. Stepman's argument is that instead of treating the scandal as a failure of Cambridge's academic vetting system, European institutions have responded by targeting people who exposed the allegations. He highlights the case of Kofnes, who was suspended by Ghent University. That's in the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken, or Belgium. Let me just make sure. Where's Ghent University? Ghent Uni. Let's have a look. Yeah, it's in Belgium. And let me just see. After criticizing Arday's work, the article also points to statements from Ghent's rector, arguing that freedom of speech is accompanied by responsibilities and can be restricted to protect other people's rights. The author sees this as part of a broader problem with DEI and political correctness within Western institutions. He argues that institutions increasingly attempt to protect favored ideological narratives from criticism, even when the criticism concerns publicly funded universities or prominent academics. The article also discusses calls for government investigation into media coverage of the Arday affair and a petition seeking restrictions on how extensively an individual can be covered by the press. The main takeaway is that the author's central argument is that the Arday affair demonstrates what he sees as a growing conflict between elite institutional power and freedom of speech, with universities and political organizations increasingly willing to punish critics rather than confront institutional failures. Let's move on to something that's not an article again. Let's move on to Instagram. And this is something that that I'm going to be talking about. Let me just talk about it before I show you guys. So what we're seeing in Portugal is part of a much wider European problem, where immigration, foreign investment, and a chronic shortage of housing are colliding. In Greece, international buyers and the Golden Visa program have helped drive demand in already expensive markets, while in Spain, cities like Barcelona are struggling with soaring rents and a severe shortage of affordable homes. Like, a lot of foreigners invest in these homes to turn them into Airbnbs and stuff like that. Like, it's turned into a business, while locals are kind of moved away. So Spain is also dealing with a very different side of the migration story in Ceuta, where huge numbers of migrants have recently attempted to enter the Spanish enclave from Morocco, putting enormous pressure in a tiny territory. And then there's Italy, which has increasingly become a destination for wealthy foreign buyers looking for everything from luxury properties to cheap rural homes, with foreign purchases accounting to an estimated 9 to 10% of residential transactions. So across Southern Europe, the picture is becoming increasingly complicated. People are arriving because they want to work or build a new life, while wealthier international buyers are purchasing property at as an investment, a second home, or a way of gaining residency. At the same time, governments have simply failed to build enough affordable housing. The result is the housing market where local workers are increasingly competing with international money, and where the question of who gets to live in Europe's cities is becoming inseparable from the question of who can actually afford to live there. Now, I also know that people who are in Europe, like the majority of countries, like from the South, people are moving to like northern countries to find better opportunities. Sometimes people in the North are moving to the South thinking that they can have it better or a different way of life. It's complicated, but it seems like nobody is happy and everything is just getting increasingly expensive. So let's look at the Portugal video, but I'm telling you guys, it applies to most of Europe's countries, especially in the South.
Raised 7.5 billion euros without ever borrowing a single cent. All it had to do was sell its housing market to rich foreigners. In 2012, the country was broke, so the government made an offer. Buy 500,000 euros of Portuguese real estate and you get a visa. Hold it for 5 years and you can apply for citizenship. They called it the Golden Visa, and 17,700 wealthy foreigners took that chance.
Let me just say that Trump also has like the golden visa. The thing is that the government gets loads of money from this sort of easygoing foreign direct investment, but it's not really investment. It's kind of like a bribe for them to get their foot through the door.
90% of that money went straight into real estate, mostly in Lisbon and Porto. Then Portugal made a second offer. Foreign retirees and high earners could move in and pay reduced tax on their pensions and dividends. 100,000 people signed up. And for the government, this looked like a win. The economy was growing and rich people were spending. Then the housing data came. Between 2013 and 2025, Portuguese home prices rose 191%. What about wages during that same time? Only 60%. Basically, for a local worker, their homes got 3 times more expensive than their paycheck. The government
3 times more expensive than their paycheck.
Scrapped the real estate visa in 2023 and closed the tax scheme the year after. Prices kept climbing anyway, and today the average Portuguese doesn't move out of their parents' house until age 28.
28. Take Greece, for example. They never move out.
One of the oldest ages in Europe. We
Let's go back. I mean,
made a little video about why housing around the world is so messed up and expensive.
and a lot of people who move out away from their parents, they rent. They don't own. Like, there needs to be that distinction.
And Portugal was a part of that, so we'll link that in the video if you want to watch it. Or comment housing. See ya.
All right, so that was it. Now let's move on to another interesting section. All right, here he is, the one, and like Chesney Hawk said, I am the one and only. So how long has this thing been going on? How long do we need to be talking about it? How long must we sing this song? So the Washington Times report focuses on Zelensky's position that holding elections while the war continues would be extremely difficult and potentially dangerous for Ukraine. His argument centers on the practical and security challenges of organizing a nationwide vote while the country remains under attack. But the issue also raises a broader question. How long can democratic elections realistically remain suspended during a prolonged war? And what happens when extraordinary wartime measures begin to look increasingly permanent? All right, so let's move on. So over here, this leads to an even bigger question of accountability, not just within Ukraine, but among the governments and industries supporting the war. If elections remain suspended for as long as the conflict continues, who ultimately holds Ukraine's political leadership accountable for its decisions, mistakes, and use of state power? At the same time, Western governments continue committing enormous amounts of military and financial assistance to Ukraine, while defense companies and the wider military-industrial complex, like we keep talking about, stands to benefit from increased demand for weapons, ammunition, and military equipment. Supporters would argue that assistance is necessary to help Ukraine defend itself, while critics question whether taxpayers are being asked to fund an open-ended war without a clear political endpoint or sufficiently strong mechanisms of accountability. The potential repercussions are significant. Public trust could erode, political divisions could deepen, and resentment could grow among Western voters who feel that Ukraine is receiving effectively unlimited support while their own governments face domestic economic pressures. Like, we keep talking about energy, we keep talking about inflation, we keep talking about everybody in Europe being screwed over. Ultimately, the difficult question is not simply whether Ukraine can hold an election during wartime, but who is accountable for the decisions being made? How long those decisions can continue without a renewed electoral mandate, and who ultimately benefits from the continuation of the conflict? Like, you have to ask yourselves these things. You have to understand that there are so many people affected by this whole situation. The Guardian report takes a similar look at Zelenskyy's warning that an election during the war could create serious risks for Ukraine. This is what he keeps saying. Beyond the immediate logistical problems, there is a deeper political dilemma here. Ukraine is fighting for its survival while also trying to preserve the democratic system it says it's defending. The longer the war continues, however, the more difficult that balance becomes, and the more important the question of when normal political accountability can realistically return. Like democracy, people want things sorted. I don't know about you guys, but if you're anything like me, I just want to get things sorted and out of the way. Just sort this out. Sort this out. It's the same with the Strait of Hormuz. It's the same with a lot of things. I just like sorting things out. Just end it. So over here from Reuters, this article, wartime election could destroy Ukraine, Zelenskyy says. I think it's with 2 Y's, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, so what makes the political people need to see this with the 2 I's, but he has 2 Y's. But anyway, what makes this political situation significant is that this isn't just pressure coming from Russia or from some foreign government. The call for elections has now emerged from inside Zelenskyy's own political establishment, with former defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov making it one of the central demands that suggests the question is no longer simply about wartime logistics. It is becoming a debate about the direction of Ukraine itself, including concerns over corruption, political accountability, once again, who's accountable, and whether the country's leadership is still adequately representing what ordinary Ukrainians want, right? I think that's important. That's important. What do they want? What do the people want? I'm sure they want this situation to end. So, and this is where the argument becomes much more uncomfortable for Zelenskyy. You can understand why holding elections during an active invasion, or shall we say the Ukrainian conflict, because who's actually doing the invasion? Here we have situations where Ukraine is invading Russia, sending missiles. But anyway, you can understand why holding elections during an active conflict would be extraordinarily difficult. But democracy is arguably becoming even more important when governments are exercising exceptional wartime powers. Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced. Soldiers have spent years fighting at the front, and civilians have lived under restrictions and the constant threat of war. Meanwhile, the longer the conflict continues, the greater the human and economic toll becomes, with ordinary Ukrainians continuing to bear the consequences of a war that shows no clear end. Let's make that clear. No clear end. Let's be realistic about this. At some point, the question becomes, how long can the population be told that its democratic rights have to wait? The polling cited here, in this article, let's have a look. Anyway, it says the polling cited here suggests that many Ukrainians currently prefer elections after the fighting ends, but even that needs to be treated with some caution. Wartime polling can potentially be influenced by fear displacement, uncertainty, who is able to participate in surveys, let's make that clear over here, let's underline it, and the enormous pressures of living through an invasion. That doesn't automatically make the results unbelievable, but it does mean we should be careful about treating any single poll as a definitive picture of what the entire Ukrainian population wants. So the criticism isn't necessarily that Zelenskyy is ignoring an overwhelming public demand for an election tomorrow. Rather, the bigger concern is whether there is a credible and clear defined path back to normal democratic life, and whether the people paying the greatest price for the continuation of the war should ultimately have a meaningful say when and how that path begins. Over here. The language about elections potentially tearing Ukraine apart is perhaps the most revealing part of the whole controversy. Elections are inherently messy. They create disagreement, expose competing interests, and sometimes produce governments that the incumbent doesn't want. But that is precisely what democratic politics is supposed to accommodate. Saying that political competition itself can endanger national unity risks creating a very uncomfortable logic where democracy becomes acceptable only when it doesn't threaten the existing political order. And that should concern anyone, regardless of whether they support Zelenskyy or Ukraine. Over here, we have an article from Time. Over here, this article focuses primarily on even more of Zelenskyy's argument against holding elections during an ongoing war. He says a wartime election would be extremely dangerous and could split Ukraine. I mean, what about his own position? Has anybody thought of that? Like, if they vote him out, it's not in his interest, right? Describing it as a potential tsunami for the country. His concern is that an election campaign during an active war could intensify political divisions and weaken Ukraine. The article also highlights the growing pressure from Mikhailo Fedorov, Zelenskyy's former defense minister, like I said before, and former ally, who has called for Ukraine to restore its democratic process despite the war. Fedorov argues that Russia should not effectively be allowed to hold Ukrainian democracy hostage. I mean, I don't know, like, it sounds a bit weird, but the main takeaway is that Zelenskyy is portraying wartime elections as a threat to Ukraine's stability, while his critics increasingly argue that the longer elections remain suspended, the greater the problem of democratic legitimacy becomes. To be honest, I have no problem with elections. Like, people should have a voice. The article over here, like, it's another one. It's not the same one from Time. We're moving on. Zelenskyy faces pressure to hold elections. What stands in his way? All right, let's see. So over here, this article goes deeper into why holding an election is practically and legally so difficult. Zelenskyy's 5-year term was due to end in May 2024, 2 years ago. But elections have been suspended under martial law since the Ukraine conflict. Around 19% of Ukrainian territory is occupied by Russia, creating major questions about how residents of those areas could participate. Or it could be an excuse. I'm not sure about that. Millions of other Ukrainians are also displaced. I mean, a lot of them fled the war. A lot of them are in European countries. The article also examines whether Zelenskyy could actually win if an election were held. One SOCIS poll put him narrowly ahead in front, around 22%, versus 21% for former military commander Valery Zaluzhnyi and 13% for Fedorov. I mean, 22 versus 21, that's very close. That's insanely close. However, the polling suggested Zelenskyy could lose the second round runoff to several potential opponents. I mean, it all depends on the sample and the sample size and like who's represented. The political pressure is also connected to corruption and governance concerns. Fedorov accused Ukraine's leadership of a systemic crisis of governance and alluded to corruption while a Zelenskyy deputy chief of staff had recently been fired amid a money laundering investigation. The article stresses, however, that Zelenskyy himself has not been implicated in that investigation. So the main takeaway is that this article is less about Zelenskyy simply refusing elections, but more about the enormous legal, security, and logistical barriers to actually conducting one, while showing that Zelenskyy is nevertheless facing increasingly political pressure and potentially vulnerable polling numbers. So, yeah. And this is ultimately why I feel and I find Zelenskyy's position so troubling. I'm not saying that holding an election tomorrow in the middle of an active war would be as simple or even necessarily possible, but Ukraine has been at war for years. Zelenskyy's original presidential term expired in 2024, and that the longer exceptional powers continue, the more uncomfortable the democratic question becomes. At some point, we have to stop treating the continuation of war as the only possible answer. Ukrainian people deserve an end to this war. They deserve to return to their homes, reunite with their families, rebuild their communities, and eventually decide for themselves who should govern them. And when a political leader says that elections would destroy the country while simultaneously remaining in power without a normal election, I think it is entirely legitimate to ask whether it is still about protecting the Ukrainian people, or whether political power has itself become something that needs protecting. And this brings us to the next question, because there are other extraordinary stories surrounding this war that raise uncomfortable questions about who knew what, who made decisions behind closed doors, and how much ordinary people have actually been told. One of the most extraordinary stories is the Nord Stream. German prosecutors have now arrested another Ukrainian suspect in connection with the 2022 pipeline explosions following earlier investigations into alleged Ukrainian involvement. And if Ukraine really was involved in an operation of that magnitude, the obvious question is, how far up the chain of command did it go? And what did Zelenskyy know? Before I continue, I just want to say again, there is an enormous difference between Ukrainian nationals acting independently, an unofficial operation involving individuals connecting to Ukrainian military or intelligence circles, and an operation directly authorized by the highest levels of the Ukrainian state. What investigators may ultimately establish is a chain of responsibility. At this stage, an alleged Ukrainian connection is not the same thing as proof of Ukrainian government involvement, and government involvement is not the same thing as Zelenskyy personally authorizing the operation. Those are separate questions, and each requires its own evidence. So let's have a look over here. So over here we have ground news, which shows all of this. I mean, it shows about the arrest of the second Ukrainian and all of this. And over here we have an article from The Guardian titled "Ukraine War Briefing, Nord Stream bombings were not us, Zelenskyy insists." So the developments around the Nord Stream investigation are potentially far bigger than just another criminal case. If investigators ultimately establish that Ukrainian-linked individuals were involved in destroying the pipelines, it could create an extremely uncomfortable political situation for European governments that have spent years supporting Ukraine throughout the conflict, and the stakes are potentially even higher now. because Ukraine is no longer seen simply as defending its own territory. It has increasingly taken the fight deep into Russia itself, launching long-range drone attacks against Russian oil infrastructure, logistics, like we've seen with Wildberries, and most recently, major all these warehouses that I mentioned. Reuters and other reporting indicate that Ukrainian attacks have hit a growing number of. Hang on a sec. All right, cool. So yeah, what was I saying about Wildberries? Wildberries is like the Amazon of Russia. So Reuters and others, like other reporting sources, indicate that Ukrainian attacks have hit a growing number of facilities at Kyiv's, or rather, as Kyiv attempts to disrupt Russian logistics and bring the economic consequences of the conflict closer to ordinary Russians, like rather than the government, rather than the war, rather than everything. Like they want to disrupt like everyone's lives, it seems. Let's have a look.
A new target. Ukrainian strikes on Russia have a new target. Near nightly drone attacks on Wildberries, Russia's leading e-commerce retailer. It sparked major fires, destroyed entire warehouses of stock, and disrupted its vast logistics network across the world's largest country. Reuters has confirmed the strike locations through verified video, which matched archive and satellite images.
This is deep into Russia, actually. And you have to like keep in mind, like this might not necessarily be the military-industrial complex. Like this is targeting civilian, like business infrastructure. You can imagine how many people are affected by this.
The attacks are rippling through Russia's retail sector, as Wildberries, along with other e-commerce platforms, handles goods and services worth the equivalent of 8.5% of the country's economy. A review of satellite imagery shows over 12 million square feet of storage space, more than a fifth of Wildberries' capacity.
All right, so I mean, we can say that, you know, Ukraine isn't on the defense. It's not just on the defense. All right, so this changing reality matters when we talk about the Nord Stream. Okay. So the conflict is no longer confined to the single narrative of one side attacking and the other merely absorbing the blows. Ukraine has developed the capability to strike hundreds or even thousands of kilometers beyond the front line, targeting economic and logistical infrastructure inside Russia. Ukrainian strikes have reached the Moscow region and other distant parts of the country, including facilities belonging to Wildberries, like I said, Russia's largest online retailer. Kyiv says these facilities are connected to logistics and the supply of dual-use or military-related goods, while Moscow disputes those claims. Over here. And this is important because if Ukrainian-linked actors were ultimately proven to have destroyed Nord Stream, the geopolitical context would be very different from the early days of the conflict. Ukraine is now openly demonstrating a willingness and ability to take offensive action against infrastructure inside Russia. Its campaign against refineries, logistics networks, and like all these warehouses has shown that economic infrastructure itself has become part of the battlefield. That does not prove the Ukrainian state involvement in Nord Stream, but it means the broader strategic concept of striking infrastructure beyond the immediate battlefield is no longer difficult to imagine. It's not so far-fetched. But that is an important distinction. It provides strategic context, not proof of responsibility for Nord Stream. Nord Stream was not just a pipeline. It was one of the most strategically important arteries in Europe's energy relationship with Russia, built at enormous cost and designed to carry vast quantities of natural gas directly into Germany and the wider European market. To understand why the sabotage remains such a massive geopolitical story, we first need to understand exactly what Nord Stream was and why it mattered so much. I mean, I'm sure everyone can see it every time they're filling their car with fuel, when they're paying their electricity bills and everything like that. So, the Nord Stream system consisted of major undersea gas pipelines running through the Baltic Sea from Russia to Germany. Nord Stream 1 had been operating for years and had become a major route for Russian gas entering Europe. Nord Stream 2, meanwhile, had been completed but never entered normal commercial operation after Germany halted its certification, amid the worsening political crisis surrounding Ukraine. For decades, Europe, particularly Germany, had built a deep economic relationship with Russia around energy. I mean, you saw it when you watched football, when you watched the Champions League, there was Gazprom all over the place. Russia processed enormous reserves of natural gas, while Europe had enormous demand for it. I mean, we know about like all the factories in Europe, like all the car manufacturers, all the washing machine manufacturers, all these things that shut down. Europe received large volumes of gas, while Russia received billions in revenue. Gas heated homes, generated electricity, and powered industry. For countries such as Germany, access to relatively affordable energy became one of the foundations of industrial competitiveness. We all know how that is now. We all have seen all the layoffs of all these companies. We all have seen all these automotive companies and industries moving outside of Europe. Like, Europe is not making it good. Like, first of all, they're not... they're doing terrible with their own, like countries in Europe are doing terrible with their own industries, but also they are completely rejecting any foreign direct investment through crazy paperwork, through crazy taxes. Like, why on earth would anybody want to invest in a European country? To be honest, I don't even know why the refugees want to come to Europe. Like, they think it's better over here. Like, a lot of them probably go straight back home. I mean, look at Ceuta, right? They just stay like for a few minutes, then they go back. What can I say? Then we also have a video of Ceuta, by the way, that we're releasing in a couple of hours. Then came like the conflict in Ukraine. From our previous point. The conflict transformed the political environment surrounding European energy. What had once been viewed primarily as an economic relationship increasingly became viewed through the lens of security and geopolitical leverage. Europe imposed sanctions, Russia's supplies fell dramatically, and the energy relationship began to collapse. Prices surged, governments scrambled for alternatives, and Europeans were confronted with a harsh reality. Replacing a major energy supplier is neither simple or cheap. Okay, so you cut off energy from Russia, you cut off energy from the Middle East, you cut off like all supplies with the Strait of Hormuz. What's going on, guys? Anyway, the images of enormous gas leaks bubbling to the surface became one of the most defining symbols of the conflict. And but let's go back. So before the explosions that damaged the Nord Stream, the old relationship was already breaking down. The pipelines had become symbols of a Europe caught between the historic dependence on Russian energy and its political and military support for Ukraine. The explosions that severely damaged the Nord Stream, again, like Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, were in September 22. So one of the biggest geopolitical mysteries of the modern era emerged. Who had the motive, the capability, and the opportunity to destroy these pipelines? Like, if you ask me, it's who had to gain from it. Russia blamed the West, Western governments, and commentators initially raised different possibilities, including the possibility that Russia itself could have been responsible. But over time, investigations and reporting increasingly focused on the possibility of a Ukraine-linked operation. German prosecutors have continued pursuing suspects, and recent developments have reportedly included further arrests connected to the investigations. So I'm not saying that Ukraine did it or anything, but what I'm saying is that they are, like, we should keep it in mind that they have been attacking as well as defending. Now, I also, one possibility that I just thought of could be the oil industry, like, or perhaps like the oil companies, maybe American-backed oil companies, Saudi-backed, who knows at this point? Like, who had energy incentives? Like, you have to like follow the money. Who's benefiting from all of this? What are the ultimate goals? All right, let's have a look at this one over here. And that is where the political implications become potentially explosive, like, mind my pun. So over here we have an article from Reuters, and the distinction could determine whether this becomes a major embarrassment or a full-scale geopolitical crisis. Because imagine the scenario in which investigators established that people acting on behalf of Ukraine deliberately destroyed a major piece of European energy infrastructure without the knowing of approval of the governments whose economies and energy systems were affected. Germany and other European countries have provided Ukraine with enormous quantities of military, financial, and humanitarian assistance. They have accepted economic costs, higher energy prices, and political instability while fundamentally reshaping their energy systems. Now, if Ukraine or actors operating under Ukrainian authority were then proven to have destroyed infrastructure connected to European energy security, the political consequences could be devastating. It could raise a deeply uncomfortable question for European taxpayers. Were countries supporting Ukraine while Ukrainian-linked actors were secretly attacking infrastructure that could affect the economic interests and energy security of those same European partners? The question would be extremely difficult for European leaders to answer. The burden on Zelenskyy would be particularly severe if evidence were ever to establish direct government involvement or knowledge. Zelenskyy's government has depended heavily on trust of Western allies. Ukraine's ability to continue the conflict has relied on maintaining military and political support from Europe and the United States. That support is not automatic. It depends on public opinion, parliamentary votes, weapons deliveries, financial packages, and the belief that Ukraine remains a reliable strategic partner. A confirmed link between a state-authorized Ukrainian operation and the Nord Stream sabotage could therefore provide political ammunition to almost every movement already skeptical of continued aid. Opposition parties across Europe could ask why their countries should continue sending billions to a government accused of attacking European infrastructure. Populist and nationalist movements could argue that European leaders place geopolitical commitments above their own national interests. Critics of military aid could demand investigations into what European intelligence agencies knew and when they knew it. And now there is another factor that makes the debate even more intense: Ukraine's increasingly aggressive long-range strike campaign inside Russia that I showed you before. The attacks on Wildberries are particularly symbolic. Wildberries is often described as Russia's equivalent of Amazon. And is deeply integrated in the country's commercial economy. Ukraine has accused the company and its logistics network of supporting the Russian military through movement of sale of dual use and military related goods. Russia denies those claims, but Ukraine has nevertheless reportedly targeted major warehouses, with the campaign causing significant disruption to the company's logistics network. Ukraine's argument is essentially that modern warfare is no longer restricted to tanks and trenches. Logistics, fuel, industry capacity, and supply networks all help sustain a country's ability to fight. If infrastructure supports a military machine directly or indirectly, then destroying that infrastructure can weaken the economy. The logic can be applied to all to even oil refineries. It can be applied to military factories. It can be applied to logistics centers. And depending on the argument being made, it can be applied to energy infrastructure. The problem, however, is that Nord Stream, okay, let me just say that again. So, oh, sorry, I lost myself. One sec. Let me find it again. Okay, so depending on the argument being made, it can also be applied to energy infrastructure. The problem, however, is that Nord Stream was not simply Russian infrastructure sitting inside Russia. It was infrastructure physically and economically connected to Europe. That makes the situation fundamentally different. Germany was perhaps the country most deeply connected to the Nord Stream story. Its economy had spent decades benefiting from access to Russian gas. The end of that relationship was already economically painful. Energy-intensive industries faced dramatically higher costs. Companies reassured investment decisions. The government had to accelerate the construction of a new infrastructure to import liquefied natural gas. The destruction of Nord Stream also had an enormous psychological impact. Whatever one thinks about whether Europe should ever return to Russian gas, a functioning pipeline represented a strategic option it could maintain, and it could remain closed and potentially be reopened in the future by a different government under different geopolitical circumstances. A destroyed pipeline, though, is something completely different. It represents a strategic option being removed by force. And this is one of the biggest implications of the sabotage. The explosions did not simply interrupt gas deliveries. They potentially removed a future political choice from Europe. Even if a future German government wanted to rebuild an energy relationship with Russia, the physical infrastructure connected with the two had been severely damaged. And that raises the stakes enormously. Europe's energy crisis became one of the defining economic consequences of the conflict. When Russian gas suppliers, when Russian gas supplies fell, Europe had to compete aggressively for alternative sources of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, from countries including the United States, Qatar, and others. Replacing pipeline gas with LNG changed Europe's exposure from a predominantly pipeline-based relationship to a more globally competitive, or should I say with a disincentive, energy market. Instead of relying primarily on long-term physical connections with a major nearby supplier, European buyers increasingly had to compete for LNG cargoes on a global market, alongside countries in Asia, China, come on, and elsewhere. That provided Europe with greater diversification, but diversification came with new infrastructure requirements, new costs, and greater exposure to global competition. That provided Europe with greater diversification, but diversification came with new costs, infrastructure requirements, and exposure to global competition, like I said. Europe's sudden entry into the global LNG market also had consequences beyond the region. Europe's increased demand for LNG had intensified competition for cargoes for the global network, creating concerns about affordability and access for poorer importers. When European governments and companies are willing to pay more for the secured energy suppliers, other nations can struggle to compete. This is why the Nord Stream was never just a European issue. Energy markets are global. A major disruption involving one of the world's largest economic blocs sends consequences. It ripples through international markets. Higher energy costs can affect electrical prices. Electricity prices can affect manufacturing. Manufacturing costs can affect consumer prices. Food production, transport, chemicals, steel, and countless other sectors can all be affected. The consequences can eventually reach ordinary people, buying food, paying electricity bill, or heating their homes. I mean, who ultimately pays the price? Let's be realistic. This is why any confirmed Ukrainian connection to Nord Stream would be so politically dangerous. Ukraine's supporters could argue that Russia had used energy as a geopolitical weapon for years, and that permanently severing, cutting off Europe from Russian gas accelerated the continent's move towards strategic independence. Critics would respond that there is a fundamental difference between reducing energy dependence through democratic political discussions and secretly destroying infrastructure connected to the energy security of allied countries. And that distinction would become central to the debate. And there is also an issue of sovereignty. European governments have repeatedly warned about the vulnerability of critical infrastructure. Undersea cables, pipelines, ports, and electricity systems and communication networks are increasingly seen as potential targets in a new era of geopolitical competition. If an allied or friendly state was proven to have secretly carried the sabotage against infrastructure affecting another European country's energy security, it would be an extraordinarily dangerous precedent. What happens when governments begin deciding which infrastructure their allies should be allowed to maintain? I mean, what if this was the military-industrial complex? I mean, they have a lot to gain from war, let's face it. Could sabotage become an accepted instrument of foreign policy between nominal partners? These are questions European governments could be forced to confront. And then there is perhaps the most uncomfortable question of them all. What did other intelligence services know? What did they know about this? If Ukrainian-linked actors carried out such a sophisticated operation, investigators and governments would inevitably face questions about where their preparations were detected. I mean, come on, MI5, MI6, James Bond, CIA, somebody must know about this. Did anyone receive warnings? Did intelligence agencies possess information before the attack? Did governments know something afterwards that was not immediately shared with the public? Even the absence of direct involvement could become politically controversial. If Western governments knew about a potential operation and failed to stop it, critics would demand answers, and if they knew afterward but concealed information, the scandal could become even larger. And if they genuinely knew nothing, then the sabotage would raise serious questions about how such a major operation could take place against critical European infrastructure without being prevented. This is why the Nord Stream investigation is far more about identifying one diver over one suspect. The question is simply who planted the explosives, who planned the operation, who financed it, who provided the equipment, who authorized it, who knew about it, and if anyone, helped conceal the truth, because these people are accomplices as well. For Zelenskyy personally, the stakes could be enormous. His international reputation has been built around presenting Ukraine as a country defending itself against a much larger adversary, while arguing that European security is directly connected to Ukraine's survival. That's his motto. If he were personally proven to have authorized the destruction of Nord Stream, opponents would immediately argue that this image his image would be like increasingly damaged. He could face accusations that Ukraine had taken unilateral action against infrastructure affecting the economic interests of its own supporters. European leaders would come under pressure to explain whether they had been deceived. Future aid packages could become more difficult to pass. The political coalition supporting Ukraine could fracture further. And now, with Ukraine increasingly striking deep inside Russia, increasingly including major economic targets, like all the warehouses and everything, critics would ask where the line should be drawn and where attacks, when attacks move from clearly military targets towards wider commercial infrastructure. Like, is Ukraine deciding these things on its own, or is it kind of collaborating with NATO, even though it's not part of NATO? You know what I mean? This does not mean Europe would automatically abandon Ukraine if evidence of involvement emerged. The wider conflict and Russia's actions would remain central to European policy, but politics does not operate in a vacuum. Public support is fragile. A single major revelation can change how voters interpret years of foreign policy, and for countries already experiencing political divisions over inflation, energy prices, military spending, and the cost of supporting Ukraine, I'm not even going to talk about like VAT and taxes in each country, a confirmed state-level connection to Nord Stream could become extraordinary powerful political weapon. Imagine election campaigns across Europe where politicians ask why billions in taxpayer money were sent to a government accused of destroying infrastructure connected to European energy security. Imagine parliamentary hearings demanding to know what intelligence agencies knew. Imagine voters who faced years of higher energy bills asking whether the destruction of Nord Stream removed Europe's ability to ever take its own decision without restoring an energy relationship with Russia. The political consequences could be enormous, but there is another side to the story, and Ukraine's current offensive campaign against Russia's economic infrastructure gives greater viability. Hang on, let me see. It actually gives greater visibility to that broader strategic argument. Ukrainian forces are increasingly demonstrating that they believe Russia's economic and logistical systems are legitimate strategic pressure points. Like I said before, I mean, let's have a look. I mean, we all saw this. This is what I showed you before, again, about wild berries. But let's move on a bit. And like all of Europe has felt the energy crisis, and and it's not just about logistics and supplies and everything. I mean, it could even affect things like medical supplies and essential things. I mean, it affects people's abilities to heat their homes, to save money for food and other essentials. It's a human problem at this point. Let's have a look at this video.
Range attacks on Russia. We are targeting or military bases, airfields, or oil infrastructure, oil refinery. We do our job very good, and we see now a lot of problems inside Russia with their economy and benefits from war to Kremlin. And now say for Russia, we can fly Vladivostok and back. We can reach any target near the Petersburg oil refineries and military objects. So we attack some military objects.
All right. Okay, so it's also important to talk about like the economic consequences of like the infrastructure, and it affects, like I said before, jobs, industrial production, electricity, heat, economic stability, geopolitical perspectives. There's like so many factors like involved with this, and also again the military industrial complex, like how, like what is their role in the Nord Stream, and does the Ukrainian government have anything to do with that? Do foreign powers have anything to do with this? Like who is ultimately responsible? And like it's also important to make like some distinctions. Like, did some people act independently? Was it some sort of like industry, like oil industry or military or weapons industries acting independently? Was it like governments independently? How high up the structure? Who like accountability? And like it's important to see like the chain of command and stuff. Like accountability should follow the evidence, not the nationality of the suspect and not the political narrative in the war. I mean, unless it was like by the government. And it's important to ask the questions because we know who ultimately pays the price about this. And I just want to say that geopolitical decisions can look very different from a government office than they do from a cold apartment in the middle of winter. So, and that's why whatever the investigation ultimately establishes, accountability matters, not because we already know who is responsible, but because once the evidence establishes who made the decisions, those responsible should answer for the consequences of those decisions. So over here, let's move on. So there was an article. Oh, okay. So let's take it. Let's move on. Let's move on from the Nord Stream onto elsewhere because I think we talked about that quite a lot. So so over here, how China found its most potent weapon. So this is an article from Columbia University in the city of New York. So this piece introduces the argument that China's dominance of rare earth elements has become one of Beijing's most powerful geopolitical tools. It focuses on the famous statement attributed to Deng, I'm sorry if I butchered the name, Xiaoping's in the early 1990s. The Middle East has oil, China has rare earth elements. That quote is now being repeatedly invoked because China has achieved a dominant position in critical parts of the rare earth supply chain and can potentially use that position to push back against US economic pressure. The important point, however, is that the authors question the idea that Deng's statement proves China had a decades-long plan to deliberately weaponize rare earths. Instead, the article examines how China gradually built an enormous advantage in the sector and only later discovered just how much leverage that dominance provided. The comparison with Arab oil power is particularly important. The comparison with the oil shocks of the 1970s is useful, but the mechanisms aren't identical. Oil-producing states exercise leverage primarily through control over a globally traded commodity and the ability to restrict oil or alter supply, like we know how OPEC worked, right? So China's rare earth advantage is more of a deeply embedded in the industrial supply chain. The leverage comes not simply from the minerals themselves, but from China's ability to mine, separate, process, refine, and manufacture critical materials at enormous scale. Like if you've played any of those RTS, real-time strategy video games like StarCraft or Age of Empires, you understand that you need to make the mine like refineries. You need to like chop all the trees down. You need to get all these resources in order to build buildings, in order to get extra people and make like a bigger empire to like defeat your enemies. So the analogy is useful for understanding the geopolitical principle. Control a critical resource and you gain leverage over countries that depend on it. But the mechanisms are different. Just as oil-producing states demonstrated that control over a critical resource could be converted into geopolitical leverage, China's control over rare earth supply chains gives Beijing a potential economic weapon against countries dependent on those minerals. So basically, the key idea here is that China didn't necessarily set out to create a weapon. It built an industrial advantage that eventually became a weapon. So it's important to see like the whole chain. So over here, the full Foreign Affairs article, How China Found Its Most Potent Weapon, The Real History of Beijing's Rare Earth Dominance, expands on exactly how this happened. The authors, Gloria Cheong and Jessica Chen Weiss, argue that China's rare earth dominance was the result of decades of industrial development rather than one grand geopolitical master plan. China invested heavily in mining, processing, and refining, while Western countries increasingly moved away from domestic production because Chinese rare earth materials were cheaper. Like, how convenient, right? That's why everything's made in China. But also, like the industry had the mentality to like kind of get a monopoly in this whole process of like production and manufacturing. Over time, this created something much more significant than simply a large mining industry. China came to occupy critical positions throughout the rare earth supply chain. And this distinction matters. Having rare earth deposits isn't enough. The real strategic advantage comes from controlling, processing, and refining capacity, needing to turn those minerals into usable materials for the modern industry. The supply chain is a much more complicated thing than simply digging rare earths into the ground, and the supply chain is much more complicated than this. So just imagine this. I'll lay it out clearly for you. So you have mining, okay? And then after mining, you separate the ores, you process them. There's the refining aspect, then there's the manufacturing of products and stuff. And they make things like magnets and specialized components, and this is what makes China's position so powerful. Mining gives you the raw materials, but separation determines whether you can isolate the individual elements. Processing and refining turns those minerals into forms the industries can actually use. And manufacturing takes the output one step further, producing the magnets, components, and specialized materials that ultimately go into electric vehicles, electronics, renewable energy systems, and advanced military technology. That means a country can have rare earth deposits and still lack the industrial capability to turn them into strategically useful products. The real power lies in controlling the industrial ecosystem between the mine and the finished component. And that is precisely where China has built an enormous advantage. Beijing's influence extends across multiple stages of the supply chain, meaning that replacing China is not simply a matter of finding another country with rare earth deposits. You have to recreate the processing capacity, the refining capacity, the technical expertise, and ultimately the manufacturing ecosystem that turns those materials into products the global economy actually needs. The real strategic leverage, however, does not come from simply, the minerals from the ground. It comes from controlling the whole supply chain that turns those minerals into something the modern economy can actually use. So, yeah, it's not just about mining. And all right, so and also this whole thing about the supply chain makes it particularly powerful in the escalating US-China economic confrontation. Beijing can potentially respond to American tariffs, sanctions, or technology restrictions by restricting access to strategically imported materials. And that is why Deng's old oil comparison has become relevant again. The significance isn't simply that China has a lot of rare earths. China built the industrial capacity. The rest of the world became dependent on it. They're relying on it, and dependence later became geopolitical leverage. So the bigger lesson is that China deliberately created a weapon. You can call this a weapon, and waited for the right moment to use it. And the author's argument is that China built the capability for economic reasons. Western countries became dependent on it. And yeah, like I said, it's all for like geopolitical reasons. And but the mechanisms aren't identical to the oil stuff of the 1970s. I mean, it's useful to compare it, but it's a whole system. Like what I've said is that China controls the whole ball game. All right, now let's move on to something a bit more fun, shall we? And let's start with an Instagram video.
GTA 6 off the dark web. This site claims they have a Grand Theft Auto 6 unreleased PS5 copy listed for $1,500. And my friends, they don't just have one copy, but they have
Oh my god, it looks real.
many copies. But for the sake of an entertaining TikTok, I think we must purchase it. 4 days later and the package has arrived. Let us open it. And I didn't know the dark web had Amazon Prime. Now for the moment of truth. Did I get scammed of $1,500, or did I get myself an early copy of GTA 6? Now I will say right off the bat, this does look rather promising, but there are a few dead giveaways that kind of concern me. Number one, you might not can see it, but the artwork is rather low quality. And number two, the rating is not yet finished. Now let's open it up. Oh my. This is what I feared of. My friends, that doesn't look like Grand Theft Auto 6 to me. This is a DVD. Let's see if this really is GTA 6.
The moment of truth.
My friends, I think we've been trolled. I bought GTA 6.
All right, so let's move on to our next deep dive. GTA 6, right? GTA 6, and this is the point where I can put my glasses on to be more like this stream's thumbnail. All right, let's have a little bit of fun with this. So for more than a decade, Rockstar Games has been building one of the most anticipated entertainment products in history. They've made Grand Theft Auto 6. Okay, it cost more than the Burj Khalifa to make. What can I say? I mean, Take-Two through Rockstar Games has made loads of money from Game Shark cards and GTA Online. They've released GTA 5 on all the consoles, but this is about GTA 6, the next one in the series that is meant to be out in November. And tomorrow they have like a special with Netflix. Anyway, like to advertise the game. But, okay, let's talk about this. So, GTA 6 has been surrounded by an almost ridiculous level of secrecy. Rockstar has carefully controlled what it releases, when it releases it, and how much of the game the public gets to see. But that secrecy has been hit by another major leak. And this time the story may be considerably bigger than a few screenshots or isolated clips. Before we go any further, there's an important distinction between what has been independently verified, what has been attributed to the people operating under the cyberleeked name, and what is simply speculation circulating online. We should therefore separate the apparent footage itself from claims about who obtained it, how they obtained it, and what access they have. The footage reportedly shows gameplay involving Jason, vehicles, combat, sections of the map, and other systems that Rockstar clearly did not intend to release publicly at this stage. And the timing could not be any worse. Rockstar has an official extended look of GTA 6 scheduled for August 27, which is tomorrow, giving the company another carefully planned opportunity to control what audiences see. But unofficial footage has already been circulating, and that changes the dynamic completely. Instead of simply asking, what is Rockstar going to show us? People are asking how much of Rockstar is going to show what has already been leaked. And that is potentially a serious problem for a country whose marketing strategy depends heavily on controlling information. A recent video examining the controversy argues that the leaked or that the latest GTA leaks could represent something much more serious for Rockstar.
The GTA 6 leak
Let's have a look at this.
story has somehow gotten way worse. I really thought there was no way this could get even more crazy, yet here we are. Rockstar has now resorted to throwing the book of law at its own fan base in a desperate attempt to find CyberLeak, the most famous leaker on the internet right now. So what's happening? Well, let's start here because this is big, guys. As seen here from Gaming Bible, CyberLeak has just vowed to leak the entirety of Grand Theft Auto 6 to the internet if their demands are not met in the coming days. This is DEFCON
Challenge accepted.
one, guys. Okay, Gaming Bible has relayed the information straight from CyberLeak themselves via their website, which no, I am not going to share the website here for very obvious legal reasons. But here's what CyberLeak issued, which confirms it is not one person, but a group of people working under a single alias, as it reads here. CyberLeak has the build, it has had it for some time, and it no longer lives in one place. Copies sit on drives and servers spread across the globe. In places Take-Two cannot reach, there is nothing left to seize. There is no server to raid, there are only copies, and none of them take orders anymore. They said more in this part here, guys. This is crazy. Look at this. Silence.
Okay, this is the important part.
CyberLeak would accomplish less than nothing. If anything happens to it, if it ever misses a morning, the cancellations end on their own. Nobody has to press anything. The release simply stops being canceled, and within days, GTA 6 will be running on the personal computers of millions of gamers around the globe.
This is proper gangster stuff. This is like Breaking Bad. This is Heisenberg level mastermind. These people are thinking ahead.
Complete, permanent, no refund, no patch, no alternative. They continue. Every day CyberLeak is left alone is another day the game stays buried. Rockstar's best move is to tread lightly. This schedule has no end date.
I said Heisenberg from Breaking Bad. Tread lightly was a quote from the show.
Resets every morning forever. Tread lightly. So what does that even mean? Well, CyberLeak is stating that they allegedly not only have GTA 6 on multiple places around the world secured safely, but they are now insinuating that they have effectively what is a doom switch system connected to the release of this game. So what they're threatening
So this part is the doom switch part.
Take-Two and Rockstar with now is that if the companies involved continue to look into CyberLeak, and if any of the members of this hacker group are found, imprisoned, what have you, that there is a doom switch that is tied directly to these games on multiple servers. And if this doom switch is not manually dismantled every single morning like CyberLeak says it is, that if they miss the trigger, the server will automatically then trip the switch and then leak the entirety of Grand Theft Auto 6 to the gaming public via every possible website.
All right, so that's a great video. It's from a channel called ENDtv. Close enough to ENDtv, like if you take out like the middle part. Anyway, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. What's up? So this video examines the controversy, and it argues that the latest GTA 6 leak could represent something much more than another embarrassing batch of stolen footage. The central concern is that the apparent access behind the leak may indicate a deeper security problem. Give me a sec. Need to check something. Can anybody hear an echo from the video? Like when I played it, I'm getting some notification that it sounded like an echo. Was it from the video or is it when I'm speaking? Can we test it? Hello, hello. I want to see the technical stuff. Is it my microphone that's loud? Should I lower it a bit? How's this? Is it better? Is this better? All right. Anyway, I'm just going to continue.
that they can manage if demands are not
Does this sound like an echo?
met. So CyberLeak pretty much just won. Assuming they're not lying here, of course, it means that Rockstar and Take-Two have to stop their investigation and
Okay. Anyway, so let me just check there are any technical issues. Anyway, if there are any technical issues, please let me know so I can fix them. All right. So, okay. So the recent video that I just showed you examines the controversy, and it argues that this could represent something more serious for Rockstar than another embarrassing batch of stolen footage. The central concern is that the apparent access behind the leak may indicate a deeper security problem. If the people distributing the material generally have access to an interactive development build rather than simply processing a handful of promotional files, then the question isn't merely what has already leaked. It's what else could they potentially access? And that's where the situation starts becoming much more serious for Rockstar. At first, a handful of clips could be dismissed as an isolated incident, but more footage appeared. As more footage appeared, questions began emerging over the apparent scale and nature of the material. There have even been bizarre demonstrations of direct interaction with the game, including footage in which the word leak appears to be shot on a wall. If authentic, it's important because it suggests something very different from something from someone simply uploading like a separate trailer. It suggests access to an actual playable build, and that raises the biggest question of them all. Where did that build come from? We don't currently have a definitive public answer, and that's probably what Rockstar and Take-Two care about more than anything else, because deleting a video doesn't solve the underlying problem. If someone gained access to a development build, Rockstar needs to know how that access was obtained. Was an employee account compromised? Was a development machine accessed? What was material obtained through a third-party company? Was something shared internally before escaping? Or did material come through another route entirely? Until that question is answered, the possibility of further leaks remains. Now, let me just check something regarding the previous technical aspect. Okay, it's sorted. So according to reports and material attributed to CyberLeak, this isn't simply about releasing GTA 6 footage. The controversy has also become part of a broader argument about the direction of the modern gaming industry. One of the biggest issues is physical media. The argument is essentially that digital distribution changes what it means to actually own a game. With a physical copy, you have something tangible. You can put it on a shelf, you can potentially resell it, you can preserve it, and depending on the game, you may be able to play it decades later. With a purely digital product, you're more dependent on the publisher, storefront, servers, updates, and authentication systems, right? That doesn't automatically make digital gaming bad, but it does raise a legitimate question. What happens when the company that sold you the game eventually stops supporting it? That is why the physical media argument has resonated with some gamers, even though the method being used to promote that argument is considerably more controversial. Reports concerning material attributed to CyberLeak indicate that the criticism goes beyond physical disc, extending into issues such as digital pre-orders, DLC, and offline functionality. And there have reportedly been threats of further releases if the group's demands aren't addressed. That changes the situation because Rockstar isn't simply dealing with embarrassing footage anymore. It's potentially dealing with someone saying we have more. And if that claim is genuine, the consequences could be significant. Imagine if the next leak isn't gameplay. Imagine if it's a major story sequence, a character death, a major location, and an entire mission, or material Rockstar had specifically planned to reveal during its official presentation. To more complete the leaked material is the more damaging the subsequent releases could become. So Rockstar has been here before in 2022 when GTA 6 suffered one of the largest video game leaks ever seen. And I also remember like seeing like some beta version online or something like that. It was some pre like before it was like properly made. You could see some levels and stuff. Well, not the levels, but the open world, like with boxes around the characters. And so rather than relying solely on copyright takedowns, Take-Two, funny enough, the name, has gone to federal court. The company has reportedly sought information from Microsoft and Discord that could help identify individuals involved in distributing or circulating the leaked material. So this is what this article is also talking about. And I mean, they have like subpoenas to find the names of these people's accounts and stuff. I don't know if people can, if Take-Two is entitled to this person's information through these other sources. I mean, what sort of precedent does this make? And over here, like this article from Game Rant, right? Rockstar's response to the GTA 6 leaks have been notably restrained publicly, but behind the scenes, the company has moved aggressively to contain them. Rather than directly engaging with the leaker, Rockstar and Take-Two have issued copyright takedowns against leaked footage and are pursuing legal action to identify those responsible. Like I said before, they're looking into Discord and Microsoft. The strategy appears to remove as much leaked material as possible without without giving the hacker additional publicity, allowing Rockstar to keep control of the reveal and marketing campaign. Now, like I said, it's important for them to figure like who had access. Yeah, we have a comment over here saying they remember the days of top-down GTA. Yeah, like from the first one, right? And the second one. That's where it all started. And okay, but things get even stranger, okay? Because, and it sounds weird, that CyberLeak, be it a person or group, had launched its own cryptocurrency. So it has like the $, then CyberLeak, leak with 2 E's, okay? And it was promoted alongside the GTA 6 leaks and used to let supporters vote on what footage would be released next. But after accusations that the entire operation was simply a crypto cash grab, right? It sounds like it. The group reportedly burnt around 270 million of its own tokens, roughly 27% of the original supply, worth around $1 to $1.5 million at the time. So they just like removed it. They burnt it. The move was clearly intended to demonstrate that CyberLeak wasn't simply planning to dump its holdings, although it's important to remember that this was, you have to remember the market value of its tokens, not $1.5 million in cash being destroyed, and because removing a huge amount of the supply can also affect the value of the remaining tokens. The burn doesn't necessarily settle the question of whether the cryptocurrency was a pure genuine fundraising mechanism or part of a larger leak operation. I mean, it could be like a whole rug pull thing. So my suggestion is don't invest in these things. So here's an article from thegamer.com that says it as well. And also some posts from like on X about all of this. And this is, oh, hang on, I wasn't sharing that. Okay. Okay, so over here is the article from The Gamer that has the title. And over here is a post on X that talks about the CyberLeak guy. So But it's important to not confuse a subpoena with an accusation. And so being referenced in a legal filing or subpoena does not by itself establish that a particular person participated in the leak. And the significance in take two is that they're trying to obtain information from online communities and services that may help reconstruct how the material traveled across the internet. That's a much broader investigation than simply finding one anonymous account. And it's important not to turn the investigation lead into an accusation. And but the video is already circulating, and once something reaches the internet, removing every copy becomes extremely difficult. Like one video gets removed, someone uploads a mirror, the mirror gets removed, someone else has already downloaded it, screenshots appear, archives are created, the material gets reposted somewhere else. The internet can turn one leak into hundreds of thousands of copies extremely quickly. So Rockstar's objective isn't simply to erase the footage, it's to find and shut down the source of the batch. And that's where the legal investigations, that's where they matter. If Take-Two can identify the people responsible, it can potentially determine how the material was obtained and prevent the same across from being exploited again. Now, but there's another major problem, Rockstar's official presentation tomorrow. The company has spent years building anticipation for GTA 6. I mean, everybody's sick and tired of this, like waiting for GTA 6. People, like whatever comes out that seems to take longer, they're like, oh, this came out before GTA 6. And like even as jokes and memes. And, but the thing is that millions of people want this thing to be fair, to have access to this thing at the same time. And it involves control and stuff like that. And again, I just want to reiterate that CyberLeak wants the gaming industry to, or like GTA 6 to have physical media, because it was weird when they announced that initially on release of GTA 6, because the pre-orders are available, that people would just get a box with a code and no disc. And yeah, but like Rockstar isn't just trying to protect GTA 6 from spoilers, it's trying to protect the entire launch. So over here, I have a game that I saw, or it's probably done with AI. That's not GTA 6, because our video would be taken down if we showed it. But this is from Instagram showing a different concept. GTA North Korea. Not gonna lie, it looked good. Like especially with all those oranges going all over the place and the car flipping. I mean, this looks like an old Mercedes. And the tram looks good. I mean, this kind of this is something I would play. I'm not gonna lie. Let's have another look at the orange section. It looks awesome, but unfortunately, I don't think this is real. But yeah, it looks good. So let's move on to our final section of the end stream, and that is our React section. So this is an article from The Guardian, and it's titled Tributes Pour In After Country Music Legend Dolly Parton Dies. So Dolly Parton was known for far more than 9 to 5 and writing what is known from Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You, that song. So over a career spanning 6 decades, she became one of the most celebrated songwriters, should I say country songwriters, and performers in American music, creating timeless songs, including Jolene, all right, and Coat of Many Colors, and Here You Come Again, while also becoming a successful actress in films such as Steel Magnolias. She built Dollywood into one of America's best-known theme parks, but perhaps her most enduring legacy was her philanthropy. In 1995, she founded the Imagination Library, inspired by her father's inability to read, providing free books to children from birth to age 5. By June 2026, the program had given away more than 325 million books to children all across the world. She also supported education, poverty relief, and medical research, including, okay, this is controversial, but maybe at the time, maybe she thought better, she gave a $1 million donation towards research that helped fund the development of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. I mean, big pharma, right? Anyway, Dolly Parton leaves behind a legacy that goes well beyond music. As a songwriter, entertainer, businesswoman, and philanthropist whose generosity touched millions of lives. All right, so speaking of death, there's also maybe an underreported death, I feel. And it's this article from mymodernmet.com. That's titled, "Man Who Spent His Childhood Living Among Wolves Passes Away at 80. So Dolly Parton was 80, this guy is 80. But what's the story, right? So I'm going to give you the scoop. I think it's important. All right, that's better. So imagine being 7 years old and being sent away by your own father into the mountains of southern Spain, where you're expected to work as a shepherd. That was the beginning of the extraordinary story. Marcos Rodriguez Pantoja. Born in Cordoba in 1946, Marcos grew up in extreme poverty and a deeply troubled family environment. His mother died when he was just 3, and after his father remarried, Marcos remembered being badly mistreated by his stepmother. Eventually, his father handed him over, or according to Marcos himself, sold him to a landowner who sent him into the Sierra Morena to work with an elderly goat herd. The old shepherd taught Marcos how to survive in the mountains, how to look after the animals, find food, and make simple tools. But then the shepherd died, leaving a 7-year-old boy completely alone. There was no school, no family, no village nearby, just mountains, animals, and wilderness. Somehow, Marcos survived for roughly 11 years. He learned to identify edible plants and mushrooms, hunt, make traps, and imitate animal sounds. Most famously, he claimed that he developed a relationship with a pack of wolves. According to Marcos, the wolves eventually accepted him, and he described them as almost as a family. He recalled one extraordinary encounter in which a mother wolf allowed him to eat from a piece of deer meat. Whether every detail of Marcos's memories can be independently verified is another question, but the years of isolation are much better documented than many of the famous stories about so-called wolf children. History is full of legends about children supposedly raised by animals, and most don't survive serious scrutiny. Take Dina Sanichar, for example, in 1867. A 6-year-old boy was reportedly discovered living inside a wolf cave in Uttar Pradesh, India. Hunters smoked him out and took him to an orphanage, where he reportedly walked on all fours, ate raw meat, and never properly learned human language. He lived into his 30s, and his story has often been linked to Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book. Then there were Amala and Kamala, 2 girls supposedly rescued from a wolf den in Bengal in 1920. Their story became internationally famous, but modern researchers have largely concluded that it was fabricated or seriously distorted, apparently to generate attention and support the orphanage. And that's the problem with many of these stories of children raised by wolves. They're often a mixture of folklore, exaggeration, exploitation, and in the worst cases, genuine child neglect. Some modern cases are considerably more credible, but involve dogs rather than wolves. One of the best known is Oksana Malaya, a Ukrainian girl who spent years living among stray dogs in a kennel during the 1980s after severe neglect. When she was eventually rescued, she reportedly displayed behaviors associated with animals she had lived alongside. But Marcus's story is different because eventually the wolves disappeared from his life. In 1965, when Marcus was around 19, the Spanish Civil Guard found him in the mountains and brought him back to civilization. He resisted being taken away. After more than a decade without normal human contact, the world they returned him to was almost as alien as the wilderness. He didn't understand many basic rules of human society. Money made little sense. Like social conventions made little sense. And even ordinary technology could be terrifying. He reportedly heard people speaking from a radio and thought actual people were trapped inside the box. And then there was his father. After Marcus was found, the authorities tracked down Melkor. You might imagine this would be an emotional reunion at the center of the story. A father finally seeing the son he had lost for more than a decade. But according to Marcus's recollection, his father didn't embrace him. He complained that Marcus had lost the jacket he had been given, I think at age 7. The authorities didn't prosecute him, and Marcus was left to navigate society almost completely on his own. He eventually spent time in Madrid, completed military service, and worked in a series of jobs, including as a shepherd and in hospitality. But the human world proved much harder for him to navigate than the mountains. Marcos didn't understand money, contracts, or how people could manipulate one another. And he later said that people repeatedly cheated and exploited him. He struggled to find stability and was reportedly taken advantage of by employers and other people who realized how vulnerable he was. At one point, he even ended up living in a cave near Fuengirola. Eventually, a retired police officer named Manuel Barandella took him in, and Marcos came to regard him as family. And I think there were other accounts of like nuns taking him in, but a lot of people were making fun of him and taking advantage. Oh, we have a comment, like commenting on my shirt. Thank you. I appreciate that. We had a GTA 6 section just now. And his extraordinary life later became the subject of anthropological research, documentaries, and the 2010 Spanish film Among Wolves. I haven't seen that yet. And perhaps that's what makes Marcus's story so fascinating. It's not really a story about a boy who was magically raised by wolves. It's a story about what happens when human being grows up without human society. We tend to think of language, morality, social behavior, and even our sense of identity as things we're simply born with. But Marcus's life suggests something much more complicated. He learned how to survive from the mountains. He learned companionship from animals like wolves. He was like speaking to birds, apparently. He learned fear from humans. Like this is depressing if you think about it. And when he finally returned to civilization, he discovered something that might be the strangest part of the entire story. The wilderness had been dangerous, but the people waiting for him weren't necessarily any safer. All right, let's move on to another story. California knows how to party. So we're going back to the 90s, right? Back to like hip hop or rap or whatever. So the Tupac, there's an ongoing Tupac murder trial of all things. Like what's going on? The Tupac murder trial has once again brought renewed attention to the long-running conspiracy theories surrounding the 1996 killing. Prosecutors are pursuing Dwayne Kelfie D. Davis, who had previously alleged that Sean Diddy Combs offered money for the killing of Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. However, Suge Knight was like Tupac's manager, but he was also involved with NWA, and he's a bit of a shoddy character. He was like accused of like beating like different people on different occasions. So there's another angle worth considering. Could some of the allegations and narratives surrounding the case have been orchestrated or influenced by Suge Knight himself? Knight was at the center of the bitter death row bad boy rivalry. Was in the car crash, not car crash, sorry, I'm getting mixed up with Diana. Car with Tupac when the shooting occurred, and has continued to offer his own accounts of what happened. That does not prove he orchestrated anything, nor does it establish the claims are false, but his position at the heart of the conflict makes his version of events an important part of the broader mystery. Ultimately, while Davis's allegations have fueled theories about Diddy's involvement, there is no established evidence proving that Diddy ordered Tupac's murder, nor evidence establishing that Suge Knight orchestrated the allegations of the killing. Now, this is an ongoing trial, so it's going to continue. Let's have a look at this.
For murder trial, prosecutors allege Keefe D. Davis orchestrated Tupac's killing, but the defense says his confession was a lie. And yesterday, some of the questions got so heated, the judge had to intervene. ABC News legal contributor Bernardo Villolona has more on all this. Bernardo, what did you make of this moment with this documentary producer telling the defense attorney, stop badgering me, then the judge gets involved?
And it wasn't just one time. It happened multiple times throughout the entire testimony. It was very clear that Keefe D's attorney had a huge issue with Mike Dorsey testifying, but specifically because the defense attorney and Keefe D himself, because at points during the testimony, Keefe D was shaking his head and shaking yes and no, of course, differing with what was stated by Mike Dorsey. So he takes issue that it was secretly recorded and that the judge ruled against him in the sense that she allowed this recording to be allowed in. Now, Mike Dorsey...
All right, anyway, there's a lot to it. So there's something that I want to say from my own like personal account, from seeing like videos of like Tupac in jail and stuff in the past, like 10 years ago or something. So after prison, or in prison, Tupac seemed to be getting sick of the whole East Coast, West Coast gangster versus gangster mentality. He became more interested in strategy, power, and understanding the bigger game around him. He was influenced by the ideas associated with Sun Tzu and the art of war. The idea of understanding your enemy, thinking strategically, and looking beyond the obvious conflict. Pac was starting to question who benefited from all this East Coast versus West Coast bullshit in the first place. Starting to question who benefited from all of this. You could say that he was becoming aware of the manipulation, the money, and the people pulling strings behind the scenes. Killuminatiing it, shining a light on what he believed, what was really going on. So let's have a look at the last react in this section. And this over here, like over here. So if you've ever wondered why Burger King is called Hungry Jack's in Australia, the answer is actually stronger than you might think. Hungry Jack's isn't some random Australian knockoff. It's essentially Burger King under a different name. When Burger King expanded into Australia, the Burger King trademark was already registered. So its Australian franchise began opening restaurants under the name Hungry Jack's. Instead, the branding, the menu, the connection to Burger King are remarkably similar. Like, who would have thought? Which is why videos like this one that I'm going to show you make the whole thing look like Australia simply copied it, copied an American fast food chain, but there's actually a legal and corporate history behind it. So I think this might be set up. It's a humorous take on this. So it's like as if he's American, and then there's the Australian guy. Who has this channel, Croc Turnbull. So let's see.
The heck is this? Hungry Jack's. This is a Burger King.
Yeah, mate. Burger King is called Hungry Jack's in Australia. Okay, same company.
I like this guy's accent. It's like Crocodile Dundee's. You know, this is a knife, but he looks a lot like Ron Paul or George Bush Jr. somehow. But anyway, let's play it.
Same burgers, same American shit, just a different name.
Home of the Whopper. What? Whopper's home is Burger King.
Yes, mate. And in Australia, Burger King is called Hungry Jack's. The reason for that is when your American fast food shit franchise came down to Australia, there was already a burger company here called Burger King, and he had the rights to the name. Okay? So your American fast food shit had to rebrand themselves as something else, as called Hungry Jack's. But otherwise, it's exactly the same, mate. Notice it's the same uniform, the same layout of shops, the same burgers. Everything is exactly...
And they try to open up their own shindig. Take notice.
Far out. Imagine flying all the way to the other...
Is the king of nothing.
Yeah, mate, you're right. I agree with you 100%. They are...
All right, so that was it. And that brings us to the end of another end stream. We've covered a hell of a lot of ground: the changing political landscape of Europe, the rise of the European right, immigration, and the future of European politics, the increasingly complicated battle over free speech, the AfD, and Germany's political firewall, Zelenskyy, Ukraine, and the question of wartime elections, the whole Nord Stream investigation, Ukraine's expanding campaign of long-range strikes against targets inside Russia, and the enormous consequences of this war for European energy security. We've looked at the China's rare earth dominance and how industrial advantage built over decades can eventually become a geopolitical weapon. And of course, none other than GTA 6, because apparently after discussing war, energy, elections, and global power politics, we also needed to investigate what Rockstar doesn't want you to see yet. But that's exactly what the end stream is about. The world doesn't exist in neat little categories. Politics affects economies, war affects energy, technology affects sovereignty, energy affects the cost of living. And increasingly, what happens online can have consequences far beyond the internet. We don't claim to have every answer, and we're not here to tell you what you're supposed to believe. We're here to give you the information, put the arguments on the table, connect the dots, and let you think for yourself. Because questioning a narrative doesn't mean you've already decided what the truth is. Sometimes it simply means asking for more evidence. And that's what ENDtv is about. No political teams, no blind narratives, just questions, context, and discussion. If you've enjoyed the stream, hit that like button, subscribe to ENDtv, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next end stream. And please share the video. Whether you agree with us, disagree with us, or somewhere in between, sharing the conversation helps us reach more people and build the community. You can also follow ENDtv on Instagram, X, and Discord. And like I said, we were simultaneously streaming across YouTube, Rumble, and Kick. And yeah, be sure to check out our other videos. We have a video coming out in roughly 40 minutes. And so yeah, before you go, tell us in the comments which story from tonight deserves the deepest investigation. Was it Nord Stream, the future of Ukraine and Zelenskyy, like should Ukraine have elections, the rise of the European right, the battle over free speech in Europe, China's rare earth power, or the increasingly insane GTA 6 leak saga? Like, is the guy gonna release it? Like he was saying that we could have a PC version, or I have to be careful with what I say. He's thinking of leaking a PC version before the console version. So I've pre-ordered the console version, but anyway, let us know. I'm Edge, this is ENDtv, and this has been the End Stream. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, keep questioning, and most importantly, don't just follow the story. Go beyond the headlines. We'll see you next time.